Our next session is on the topic, the autonomous reality, an honest conversation on scalability, timelines, regulatory, legal, and ethical hurdles. To talk about this topic, we have with us the founder and chief technology officer of Meter Feeder Inc., Mr. Daniel Lopretto. Let's welcome him with a round of applause.
Thank you to everybody for sticking around past lunch. It's getting to that sleepy hour after lunchtime, and thank you to the previous presenters today. So we're going to start off with a conversation about an autonomous reality. So if I move forward here, and oops, I need to go back one. Okay, thank you so much. All right, so let's have an honest conversation about an autonomous reality and see what we can sort out amongst kind of all the promises and all the thoughts that are out there kind of being developed over the last few years. Before I do that, I want to just kind of clear up what we mean by a few different terms. And the first one is what I mean by an autonomous vehicle, because I'm sure that we all have a different definition of what that may be. So specifically, during this talk, I'm going to talk about the goal of an autonomous vehicle, which is high automation or full automation. And that's a vehicle that performs all of the driving functions most of the time. Most specific, some limited circumstances. There's other classifications, of course, of autonomous vehicles. You could consider, if you have a broad enough definition, just cruise control. Right? But we're talking about maybe or maybe not there's a steering wheel. Maybe the only humans in the vehicle are sitting in the back seat, or there may not be any humans involved in the process at all. So those are the goals that we're going to talk about how we get to today. And the other definition is how honest do you really want me to be? When I was going over the ins and outs of how this conversation, we came up with the title of an honest conversation, and my response was, how honest should I be? It elicited a bit of a nervous laugh, but the truth, the hard truth of that is that there is no small jump, of course. As we heard about earlier today in some of the conversations, one of the most difficult parts of creating a vehicle that drives itself is the other vehicles that are out there being driven by human beings. A lot of that was talked about earlier today. I hope you caught those conversations. They were wonderful. So with that in mind, and we can talk about the incremental changes that we're going to have, because as I said, there's no small jump. It's many incremental changes. And if we look at the cars that we're able to purchase today versus the cars from 10 years ago or 5 years ago, there has been many, many incremental changes that have happened that have gotten us closer to the goals that we're talking about here today. And there's still more that we need. So the first thing that I want to talk about as a prerequisite to an autonomous vehicle is the idea of failing safe. And for the most part, our vehicles today sort of fail operationally, which is how they're designed. They're intended to fail operationally. If your tire goes flat while you're driving down the road, it doesn't automatically stop in the middle of the road and causing traffic jam or pileup. You have the opportunity to move it off to the side of the road. That's an operational fail. Again, if the turn signal stops working, the car can still be driven. That's an operational fail. But when you think about giving the ability to control, the ability of control over the idea of what state is the vehicle in at this specific failure, and being able to trace back a specific failure to what should be happening. Those large matrices of ideas of the turn signal goes out. Should we prevent the car from even being able to pull out of the parking lot, or is it safe to travel still? What about if the turn signal goes out while it's on the road and the bulb burns out? Well, maybe the safest thing to do is get the passengers to their destination and not leave them stranded on the side of the road. But those are questions that we'll be needing to answer when we think about how we correctly fail in a safe state for autonomous vehicles. Especially vehicles that don't have another mode of operation. And if there's no way for a person to take over and drive the vehicle because there's no interface for the human being, there's no steering wheel or brake, then we need to think very hard about what happens and at what point do we say this vehicle is no longer roadworthy. And those are tough decisions to make, because are you putting the person in jeopardy by saying it's safer to get you where you need to go than leave you stranded on the road, but am I doing it in an unsafe vehicle? Or when a bus breaks down, the obvious solution is another bus pulls up and takes the person along. And maybe that's the solutions that we'll come up with. We talked a lot about this again today, and I'm glad to kind of be putting a summary together of it here for you. But communication interfaces. We have a lot of ways as human beings that we communicate, sometimes kindly, sometimes unkindly, in our vehicles to each other. But we do have the opportunity to talk about the communicative interfaces of vehicles. Right now, one of the largest focuses is computer vision, and that's infrastructure, the existing infrastructure. What does a stop sign mean when we see one? What does a red light mean? A very low technology example from the infrastructure standpoint, I should say. It's very high technology on the part of the vehicle. But the ability to understand and receive signals, whether visually or over airwaves, whatever sort of, we talked earlier today about the discrepancies about what the best communication systems are for all of these. And I will say that it is still confusing how we'll be able to accomplish some of these tasks. But we know that V2V communication, vehicle to vehicle, the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration does have a working proposal for vehicle-to-vehicle communication, and they point out some safety guidelines. More, if you look at their recommendation at this point, they are talking more about the shape of the information. What kind of information will vehicles be able to transmit, or should vehicles be required to transmit, and how will the other vehicles, what is that common language going to look like? They are a little more obscure on what form those communications will take place, whether it's 5G or Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. We know a lot of those technologies don't have the capability, or may not have the capability for a few years to come, to be able to satisfy the requirements of the proposal, and I guess that's why it's still in the phase that it's in. The exciting thing for me, being in the parking industry, is the vehicle to infrastructure side of it, where we use the same ideas that we're getting from vehicle to vehicle, and we learn more about what the intents of those vehicles are, either when they reach their destination or different points along their journey. What information can we learn to reduce traffic, to make sure we have seamless transitions once people reach their destination. And it's exciting that there's an opportunity that the same communication layer will be useful for vehicle to vehicle as vehicle to infrastructure. So let's dive a little bit deeper into that. There are some potential issues with any sort of massive amounts of data coming towards a single point. And one of the things that we will have to consider is the authentication of those messages. How do we know that we can trust the messages that are being broadcast into the vehicle? What decisions, what security measures are in place to make sure that the transmitter of that message is trustworthy? And what about the arbitration of those messages? If we think of the example, maybe we have 4 lanes of highway, or even more if you're near LA. You have many vehicles all traveling in the same direction, all transmitting signals. There's a large truck, and in front of that truck, someone stops short. The truck sends out a signal that it has to also make an emergency braking. How do the vehicles behind that point on the road know whether that signal was for them or not? Do they all now think, well, the vehicle in front of me is stopping short? Or is there a layer in our communication system to be able to pinpoint exactly what vehicles behind need to pay attention to the message? And that layer of arbitration is going to be a difficult one for the future of these V2V communications. The other thing is conflict resolution. It could be deciding whether or not you trust the message is one thing, but if 2 vehicles that are on the same road send you different information, you have to decide that one of them is right and one of them is wrong. You may be in a lucky situation where 14 vehicles are sending you one piece of information and then you have one outlier. And machine learning techniques tell us that that's a very easy problem to solve for. We can just draw a straight line and everybody on one side wins and everybody on the other side loses. But that won't always be clear-cut. There will be situations where we will need to pick, hopefully, with proven machine learning models again, if enough vehicles decide this is not a message that is trustworthy, this is not a trustworthy source of information, then they start, then slowly it phases out of the network and is no longer listened to or is flagged in some other way as contaminating the whole ecosystem. Okay, so once we can get past some of these problems, how will we be able to use new incremental changes? We've had many incremental changes. I love my backup cam. So, there's all these really great features that we're putting into vehicles, and how are we going to use systems such as vehicle-to-vehicle communications? The first thing is that we want to increase safety with it. Right? If we have the ability to tell other vehicles that we are a hazard or that we've detected a hazard, that's a crucial pathway for allowing the communication between autonomous vehicles and human operators. The next one would be additional broadcasting of laws, and this is often referred to as formal norms, right? Laws, other things that the ways that we know we're supposed to be behaving on the street. Those can change from time to time. There is a stop sign at the end of my street that has been down for 4 years, and everyone in the neighborhood stops there. We know it's a formal norm. We understand it. We don't need a stop sign, but I still complain every other month or so at the council meeting that they need to put a stop sign in, and it hasn't happened yet. Anyway. But we do. We have a list of formal norms that we can standardize, usually standardized as laws, and we can broadcast those throughout the systems. And this happens already in a lot of your vehicles. I'm sure it tells you whenever you're speeding. You may see blips on your smartphone or your in-dash telling you where the stop signs or other hazards are on the road. So those systems right now are kind of built in an ad hoc way. They're reported by other users. They've been kind of built together, but there's no one unified system. The gentleman who spoke before me talked about the ability to unify these systems across OEMs, and that doesn't exist right now. The ability for vehicles to communicate this information to each other kind of builds a pathway for sharing technology without the OEMs agreeing to share the information, which is kind of a strange idea, but it will exist. So if we were able to categorize and broadcast the formal norms, what about the informal norms? And I believe that through vehicle-to-vehicle communication and specifically machine learning models, we can create a list of informal norms. We can watch human behavior and understand it in a way that makes sense to the robots. They can mimic us. I found this picture and I thought it was just fantastic because I do come from the parking industry, and the enforcement officer inside of me sees 3 parking tickets that can be written there. I don't know about the rest of you. I will give you a hint though. This car down here has its 3rd brake light on. Maybe you know what that means. Anyway, I don't know who's parked illegally there. I know that this guy's parked in a bike lane. Maybe you didn't see that one. These guys are on the sidewalk? But it seems like that's the norm because we've got multiple vehicles there, although there is someone in this vehicle. I cheated before. I gave you the tip, the 3rd brake light. Someone's foot's on the brake pedal, right? So there's a human being inside that vehicle, so technically we can't give it a parking ticket even though we really want to. What's that? It could be an Uber, right? Maybe that's the formal norm. Maybe you're supposed to park on the sidewalk sometimes. I don't know. It could happen. But there is some hidden arcane knowledge that the individuals, at least 2 of them, that live in this neighborhood know that is very difficult to translate to an autonomous vehicle. And through time, hopefully through machine learning models, through recording and predicting acceptable behavior and then seeing how a human counterpart interacts with something after we've made a prediction, we can determine those normal and abnormal use cases. I often hear a lot from those that are building autonomous vehicles that their number 1 mandate is to never break the law. I absolutely agree with that. They shouldn't speed. They should use their turn signals. They should follow all the norms that we have in place. But there are many informal norms, as we've looked at, that we don't want those vehicles to become a nuisance because they don't understand the normalcy of some of the driving patterns that we have. Okay. I have another example of formal norms. The first time that I had the pleasure of being in an autonomous vehicle, I had to go back and look up the date. I apologize for not sharing a picture of myself in the autonomous vehicle. It was a little silly. But it was March 22nd, 2016, and it was in the parking lot of the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California. It wasn't much of an autonomous vehicle. I apologize to the manufacturer of it. It was just an autonomous golf cart, and me and my friend Jim got inside of the autonomous golf cart. There was just a flat panel in front of us, and up where the sun visors would be, there was the interpretation of our surroundings as a fancy image that it was some sort of interpretation of what the state of the road in front of and to the sides of. And again, we're in a parking lot in the Computer History Museum. And it was a one-way lane down the parking lot, and that's the direction that we were traveling because we were following the formal norm. Another vehicle decided to pull out of their parking space and turn in the direction that we were coming towards them. We were in the middle of the lane. There were vehicles on both sides. It had split the difference in safety by putting an equal amount of distance between the vehicles on the left side and the right side of the autonomous vehicle. It had done the right thing. That put us smack dab in the middle of the lane. It also was programmed to say, if you have an interruption in front of you, stop. So we came to a complete dead stop in the car in the other direction, not knowing that that me and Jim had no ability to control this vehicle whatsoever. Flashed his lights first at us. Come on, you come around me. He pulled over to the side, just as he should. We waved, shrugged our shoulders. He flashed his lights again. Then he honked his horn. And then I got out, and I walked over to him, and I said, I'm sorry, but we can't move this. And begrudgingly, he turned around and left. It's interesting. And of course, that was a long time ago, right? It was 2016. We've come a long way since then about these different ideas. But we became a nuisance in that parking lot that day. And the idea that if there is no way for us to interact with the vehicle, if we do get to that point, then we need to be very sure. Let's go back to those ideas about failing in a safe manner. Whether it's following the formal or informal norms, becoming a nuisance or not, were we able to stay in a safe situation? And at the end of the day, yes, we came to a stop in a parking lot. A lot of cars do that. It's a safe place to be in, so we were good. But thought needs to be taken. So on my next slide, I want to give you a few more predictions. Why, the whys of why we want to move into this direction. And I'll go into the next slide here, it's just 94%. We had the conversation earlier about fatalities in vehicles. Now this 94% represents, of all accidents, 94% can be taken back to human behavior, something they did that the human that was operating the vehicle did. Chuck and Kevin spoke a lot about this earlier today, and I won't go too much into repeating what they said. But I do want to point out that I think that one of the things that we can expect, one of the things that we see now from manufacturers and from regulators is that a passive human operator, just in case, is probably a really good idea. And there's some division of thought about those passive operators. There's some big pros and cons. Like I said, some believe that your safety can't go down if you've got a human in there, right? That's your fallback point. At least there's a human in there. You can't get worse if you're back to a human. I don't know if that's true or not. The less interaction that an operator has and takes on the whole, the less likely they are to take action when it is critically needed. They allow themselves to get distracted. And we see this in the few accidents that have happened already. There's a middle of the road, a middle ground on this idea, which is a form of gamification. It's also known as the dead man switch, forcing interaction from the passive human operator to ensure that they're engaged, and if they fail to comply, then we pull over to the side of the road and get into a safe state. Maybe that's the answer. But again, we'll get back to that idea that a lot of the problem is actually those human drivers. And I don't have an answer for you. I just have this prediction that we have the ability, as an engineer, and I'll be honest, as an engineer, if you look at a situation that has a security problem or a safety problem, my idea is to compartmentalize it. What parts of the system are causing the safety, the security? Maybe it's just a slow system that doesn't work as fast. What are the bottlenecks? What are those problems? Find those and isolate them. And my thought around this is that continuing to have that passive human operator isn't really isolating it. And I'm sure many people will disagree with me, but I think that's kind of the point, is let's have the thought, let's have the conversation about how do we make sure that we're not creating a less safe scenario by allowing our drivers to get distracted and not be able to make that crucial decision when they need to, that they're there for. We improve systems with human operators. So human operators, the tests that are going on right now with human operators are extremely valuable. And the main reason for that is the analytics and the machine learning that comes from having those human operators there. You have your autonomous vehicle taking action, and you have the option of human operator to intervene. And what you do is you record any intervention that the human operator has. They put their foot on the brake because they're afraid they're going too fast. That's a great example. Why did the human operator take that interaction? You compare, you have what the human decided was the better option. In some way, you're using a machine learning platform, so you do have a predicted path that robot was planning to take, and you compare those two. And you do that across many, many iterations, following what is it, why are there these interventions happening? Is it this one certain place in the road that everyone knows is maybe a little bit of a dicey shoulder, so everyone just reflexively takes a break there, whereas if you're following the trend line of how safe is it to go around that corner, you're fine if you're in a vehicle. Perhaps there's something to that, and those machine learning algorithms are what are going to allow us to perfect the autonomous vehicles. And so I do think that the human operator, the trained human operator, will always have a place in helping us improve and iterate on our designs. All right. My next prediction, and I'm really excited about this, again, because I'm in the parking industry. My next prediction is that we will be able to reduce urban sprawl. And if you think it's going to take a long time for autonomous vehicles to show up, it's going to take even longer for them to have an impact on urban sprawl. But we do have the opportunity with autonomous vehicles to rethink zoning and planning. We're in Vegas, so I will pick on the Las Vegas zoning code. And if you go in, and I went in and read it, and I was sure I could find something absurd. If you want to open a barber shop in Las Vegas, you need two spaces for each barber chair and 3 spaces for each beautician salon. There's an inherent assumption in here that is incorrect. And that inherent assumption, and all zoning laws account for this in some way, but the requirement is a function of the business at maximum capacity, right? However many barber chairs you have, you've got to have enough parking spaces for that place to be filled. 10% of the time? Definitely not in the morning when you open up, or at night when you're sweeping up the floor. There's an assumption that everyone who works or visits a business will bring a car and need to park that car while they're at the business. And that assumption can go away with autonomous vehicles. So my prediction of the parking lots taking up most is Joni Mitchell's dream, right? We can tear up the parking lot and maybe have paradise again. The last prediction I want to talk to you about today is redefining convenient parking. So, how do the expectations of these 4 individuals differ? Because they all have very different parking ideas. If you're dropping off your dry cleaning, you have a different expectation of when you're going to need your car again than if you're eating at a restaurant, right? If I'm dropping off a dry cleaning, I don't want my car to go anywhere, even though it has the ability to, because I'm going to go in and I've got to unload something. And I maybe even need to reload something back into that vehicle when I return to it. So I want to make sure it stays where it is. And because I'm carrying something from the vehicle into the business, I want it to be as close as possible. I may even be willing to pay a little more for it to be as close as possible. I hope so. It's my business. If you're eating in a restaurant, you do not need that vehicle parked outside, but you do want to be dropped off in front of that business. You want to be able to get out of your vehicle, go into the business, sit at your table, and enjoy your meal, and maybe in the course of your meal, you'll decide, oh, you know what? Let's take a walk down the street. I don't want my vehicle where I left it because I'm going to take maybe a walk. I'm from Pittsburgh, so I always want to take a walk along the river and look at the bridges. So maybe you want to take a stroll through the neighborhood after you're done at your restaurant. You want that vehicle to be in a different place than it was whenever you started your meal. Here's a mixed use one, and this one is something that we think about. Like we can figure these out, right? All right, the car drops you off in front of a restaurant, we'll send it away for an hour, and then when you touch a button on your phone, we'll have the car come back to you. It'll go fine, and this is interesting. I'm kind of running out of time, but it's interesting because we can think about the idea for the restaurant example, and I do want to dive into this, although these are all very interesting to me. Eating in a restaurant, right? We think about the ideas of what is the, apologize. Yeah, when you're eating at a restaurant, you have the idea of knowing or anyone who's in the fleet industry will understand this very well. You know how much it costs every time one of the wheels on that vehicle go around one time. You probably have it down to that much of a science, right? It's not per mile, it's per wheel revolution. And thinking about the idea of how much it costs to pay for parking versus how much it costs for that car to go find a parking spot. So if I can park real close and it costs me $20, or I can drive for 15 minutes and pay 30 cents, it's different ideas. And there's a very interesting model around that, of being able to optimize how we store our vehicles long term. I wish I had more time. That's my next slide. Is what is the cost of operation versus the cost of storage of a vehicle? So I'll leave you with that thought on your own, and I thank you all for being very attentive to me today. I apologize for running out of time and not having a chance to take questions, but if anyone would like to come up to me afterwards, I am all ears and look forward to speaking with you. So thank you.